My name is Jonathan Cooper, and I was born in a small town in the American countryside in the mid-1925. My family always valued duty and patriotism, and I grew up listening to stories of bravery that my grandparents told about the turbulent times our country had faced. I was the eldest of three siblings, and from an early age, I realized that discipline and courage would become fundamental values in my life. When war broke out, my heart was filled with uncertainty, but also with an unshakable conviction that I had to fulfill my duty in defending my country. When I decided to enlist as a Marine, I knew my mother feared for my safety. However, she also understood that the love for our nation ran deep in our veins. I still remember her hugging me at our doorstep, whispering that, no matter what happened, I should always hold honor above all else. That moment is etched in my memory because I felt, with every fiber of my being, the responsibility I carried. Many may wonder why someone would take such a risk. I often ask myself the same question. Yet, the desire to protect our country and preserve the values we stood for spoke louder than fear. In my first days of training, I remember the sound of bootlaces hitting the ground with every step, the commanding voices echoing through the barracks, and the sweat dripping down my face as we practiced hand-to-hand combat techniques. The smell of gunpowder mixed with damp grass after summer storms still brings back vivid memories of those days. It was exhausting, but at the same time, there was an undeniable sense that we were heading towards something greater than ourselves. I always saw myself as an ordinary young man, but suddenly, I was holding a rifle and wearing a Marine uniform. Each passing day pushed me beyond my limits, learning to respect the chain of command, to obey orders, and to trust my platoon was essential. There, I understood that no one wins a war alone, and that the strength of a unit lies in unity and mutual support. Are we truly prepared to sacrifice part of our personal freedom in the name of the greater good? It was in that environment that I forged unbreakable bonds of brotherhood. I miss many of the men I met during that time. Some came from faraway places with accents I had never heard before, but we all shared the same purpose: to defend our nation against threats that sought to endanger our freedom and security. Today, as I look back, I ask myself if I would have made the same decision. With each memory, I feel both pain and pride. And you, who are listening to me now, can you imagine the mix of fear and determination that resides in the heart of those who choose to wear the uniform? Share your thoughts on these stories of courage, because every voice and every experience is a vital part of our collective memory. My first combat deployment was in the Pacific Theater, specifically on the island of Iwo Jima. We departed from the mainland United States aboard a military transport ship, surrounded by anxious faces and pounding hearts. The journey felt endless, but each day at sea was a lesson in camaraderie and resilience. The rhythmic sway of the waves, the salty scent of the ocean, and the constant clatter of onboard equipment became the soundtrack to our growing uncertainties. When we finally landed, we were met with a reality far different from what we had imagined. The heat was suffocating, and the island's volcanic terrain made every step a challenge. The black sand clung to our boots, and the air was thick with the smell of sulfur mixed with the sweat streaming down our faces. The feeling of vulnerability was overwhelming. It didn't take long for us to understand why this place was so strategic, yet so deadly. As a Marine, my role put me on the front lines, which meant being constantly alert to any enemy movement. Every sound became a warning. The snap of a twig could send a jolt of adrenaline through my body. At times, the silence was even more terrifying than the sound of machine guns. Ask yourself, could you stay calm while walking through an unfamiliar battlefield, never knowing from where danger might strike? At nightfall, we set up camp and tried to rest, but sleep never came easily. Instead, we remained on edge, ears straining against the darkness, as if it could swallow our hopes at any moment. Even so, the fire of patriotism inside me never faded. There was something powerful about looking at my uniform and remembering why we were there. We weren't just fighting for ourselves. We were fighting for the families we left behind, for our collective future, and for the belief that freedom is a treasure beyond measure. Once, during a brief lull between offensives, I received a letter from home. My mother wrote about how my younger brother missed me, and how proud my father was of me. I couldn't hold back the tears as I read her words. Even in the midst of chaos, That small piece of paper reminded me that love and hope still existed. And you, listening to this story now, do you understand the power of these small messages of support during times of conflict? If you have a story of resilience to share, leave in the comments. Our experiences can inspire others. During that time, I learned that the essence of humanity shines brightest when we are surrounded by darkness. Among makeshift trenches, artillery fire, and voices of command carried by the Pacific wind, I discovered the strength of an unbreakable conviction. Protecting what we love and upholding honor is what makes us truly alive. During the first assaults on Iwo Jima, my most vivid memory is the deafening roar of the naval cannons offshore. Each shot seemed to vibrate through my chest, and the ground trembled as if it wanted to swallow us whole. Amid this symphony of chaos, flashes of light tore through the gray sky, illuminating faces etched with tension. As we advanced, my senses sharpened. The acrid smell of gunpowder clung to my nostrils, and the metallic taste of fear settled in my mouth. The skirmishes with enemy forces were relentless. There were moments when our platoon found itself trapped in craters formed by the relentless shelling, turning us into easy targets. In those moments, despair tried to take hold of me, but I always clung to a silent kind of hope. I remember a fellow Marine who, even wounded, refused to give up. He kept his rifle steady in his hands, saying that as long as he could pull the trigger, he would keep fighting. That kind of determination inspired me to push forward, even when everything seemed meaningless. Between battles, I tried to find brief moments of respite to reflect. The solitude of the front is real. You're surrounded by people, yet you feel completely alone with your thoughts. I asked myself, is a soldier's greatest battle fought on the battlefield or within himself? War forces us to confront our own humanity or the loss of it in the harshest way possible. And maybe that's what scares us the most. Each morning, the island revealed new scenes of devastation. Shell craters, twisted vegetation, and an unforgiving sun beating down on us. Time lost its rhythm. The days blurred together, and the only certainty was a need to survive the next attack. Amid this reality, the longing for home became a driving force to persevere. I would picture my mother's face, my father, my siblings, imagining the day I could return and hold in my arms again. Talking about these moments isn't easy, but I believe that sharing these experiences helps others understand just how much war takes from each of us. The price is paid not only in lives, but in dreams, in pieces of our soul that will never be the same. If you've ever had to fight for something greater than yourself, you understand this feeling. Leave a comment sharing your perspective. Our exchange of reflections can strengthen us all. As the weeks passed, the emotional and physical strain intensified. Yet, our faith in the mission remained unshaken. It was that faith that kept us going. The island was just a small dot on the map, but it was here that the fate of thousands was being decided. And I, just one among so many Marines, felt honored to be part of something greater than myself, the fight for freedom. At one point, our lines advanced enough for us to establish a small operations base. We were housed in makeshift tents, planted in the black, volcanic sand of Iwo Jima. With every gust of wind, dust invaded our eyes, noses, and mouths, making everything even more difficult. Still, there was no time for complaints. We needed to organize supplies, tend to the wounded, and reinforce our defenses for the next fight. It was during this time that I experienced, for the first time, the feeling of watching a close friend fall in combat. A guy who shared meals with me, who told stories about his girlfriend and his dreams for after the war. To see him fall, without having a chance to fulfill everything he dreamed of, broke my heart in an irreversible way. How do you move on after witnessing something like that? It's a wound that, in some way, never truly heals. In those moments of deep sorrow, I sought solace in the memory of the mission that united us. We were more than soldiers. We were a temporary family, forged by the same ideal. And the only way to honor those who had fallen was to keep doing our duty, keeping the front lines firm, protecting each other, and fighting with even more determination. Perhaps that is the greatest symbol of respect we can give to those who didn't make it home. For many, war may seem like a distant story, told in books or depicted in movies. But for those who lived through it, each explosion is an echo that resonates to this day. During the first confrontations, I hesitated when pulling the trigger, fearing the act of taking lives. However, I learned that, in the middle of the battle, the choices are harsh and immediate. There was no room for hesitation, and I had to deal with the moral weight that comes with it. Time on that island seemed to stand still. The nights blended into the days, and the sound of machine guns mixed with the beat of my own heart. Sometimes, I wondered if I would ever have a chance to return to the routine of an ordinary person. Waking up in my bed, having a quiet cup of coffee, and seeing my family without the shadow of an imminent conflict. And you, over there, have you ever reflected on how many simple things in life we take for granted until we're deprived of them? Even today, when I close my eyes, I can feel the suffocating heat of that place and hear the alert shouts echoing in the trenches. But I also carry with me the pride of having fought for something that, to me, was always greater than my own insecurities. I invite you to reflect and, if you wish, share in the comments what it means to defend a cause that transcends our own desires. Perhaps together, we can find meaning in so many stories of sacrifice and overcoming. After weeks of relentless combat, our unit received word that the enemy was weakened but still resisting in caves and underground tunnels. We then began exploring narrow, suffocating corridors, guided only by flashlights and the courage we had left. The air was thick, heavy with tension. Every step was calculated because any wrong move could trigger an ambush. I remember one particular early morning. I was assigned to a reconnaissance patrol in a heavily mined area. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as we advanced. Sweat dripped down my face, and my numb fingers gripped my rifle tightly. The dim light inside the caves made every rock look like a looming shadow. We spotted enemy silhouettes in the distance, but avoided direct confrontation to keep our mission from being compromised. When we finally returned to our base, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and silently thanked whatever force was watching over me for another chance to stay alive. In those underground spaces, I realized how fear could become as powerful an enemy as any weapon. Keeping our minds sharp was essential, even when everything around us screamed danger. At times, I questioned whether it was all worth it, if risking our lives for an unknown island truly made sense. But then I remembered the strategic importance of that position for the outcome of the war. It was a key piece that, if secured, would spare our country from future threats. That gave me the strength to keep going. As operations progressed, our unit gained more control of the territory, but the losses continued. With every Marine who fell, reality struck us harder. We were young, full of dreams and plans. Some of my friends wanted to return home to take over their family businesses. Others talked about getting married and building a peaceful life. I myself dreamed of resuming the studies I had put on hold to enlist. It hurts to know that many of those dreams would never come true. During one of our final offenses, I had the chance to help a gravely wounded comrade. I dragged him behind a pile of rocks, where we set up an improvised aid post. The entire time, I prayed he would hold on until the medics arrived. Life is fragile, and in war, that truth becomes painfully clear. In the end, he survived, but he was never the same. His eyes carried the mark of someone who had stared into the abyss. Even after witnessing so much pain, I still believe in the importance of our sacrifice. Sometimes in life, we have to make tough choices to protect something we hold sacred. And what about you? Do you agree with that? Or do you believe there are limits that should never be crossed? Share your thoughts in the comments, because every perspective helps us reflect on human nature and our pursuit of freedom and peace. When the news finally arrived that the conflict in Iwo Jima was coming to an end, I experienced a bittersweet mix of relief and melancholy. We had fought with everything we had, watched friends fall, and faced fears we never imagined we could endure. Among the ruins, we carried the survivors, counted the wounded, and mourned those who would never return. The island, the stage of relentless battles, had become a graveyard of interrupted dreams. The return to the military transport ship was marked by contemplative silence. Few of us felt capable of celebrating. Instead of smiles, there were distant gazes and bowed heads. As the days at sea passed, we slowly began to talk about the future, and hope started to return. I thought about my family, everything I had sacrificed, and my deep desire to rebuild my life. Yet I knew I would never again be the same young man, who had left home so full of idealism. The war had transformed me in profound and irreversible ways. When I set foot on American soil, I was greeted with applause and words of gratitude, but I wondered if people truly understood what we had endured. I suppose war is something impossible to fully grasp unless you've lived it firsthand. Still, the warmth of that reception was comforting. It reassured me that our efforts had not been in vain, and that every sacrifice had helped to protect the freedom we so deeply cherish. The first months after my return were difficult. I would wake up in the middle of the night, startled, convinced I was still in Iwo Jima, ready to respond to an attack. The sound of fireworks on national holidays made my heart race. Over time, I sought help to cope with these traumas, realizing that war does not end when the last shot is fired. It lives on in the memories of those who survived it. Even today, as I revisit these stories, I feel a mixture of pride and sorrow. It is impossible to erase the images of destruction and the loss of good men, but I choose to honor them by telling what I witnessed, so that others may understand the raw and unfiltered reality of war. If there is one lesson I carry for the rest of my life, it is that peace is precious, earned through immense sweat and blood, and it is our duty to fight to preserve it. And so, I close this testimony, inviting you to reflect on the value of freedom and the importance of honoring those who gave everything for a greater cause. If this story has touched your heart in any way, share your thoughts with us. Together, we can keep alive the memories of courage and service that shaped the destiny of so many men and women. This is our legacy, and it is up to us to preserve it.